listening to the same audio examples and being like, if I change this math on the algorithm here, does it sound better? Listening, I don't think that sounds better. And going back, doing another run, doing that so much, like hours and hours on end of just being like, but in my opinion, it doesn't sound right to me.
That's Hannes Andersson, the developer of the dynamic resonance suppressor, Soothe. Soothe has become a near-standard mixing plugin used on countless hit records, films, and television shows. When the algorithm started sounding more like a monster than a mixing tool, Hannes and his co-founder spent hours adjusting the math and listening until it finally sounded right.
Their ears have shaped a lot of music that's out there just because they're using this tool that picks out resonances based on what they heard in their audio.
In this episode, you'll learn why machine learning can be the wrong direction for audio quality, why Oeksound rebuilt the Soothe algorithm from scratch, and what it takes to design an audio tool with no hardware precedent. Stick around, I'm Bobby Owsinski, and this is my Inner Circle podcast. Soothe is very different from most other plugins. So why don't you describe it first of all, and then I want to know how the idea came to be on that.
Soothe is a plugin we call a dynamic resonance suppressor. I can both explain what it does and how the idea came to the founder, Olli, at the same time, because it kind of has to do with what it does. So resonances in recorded material is usually something that we reach for an EQ to subtract. Sharp notches, you search and destroy, kind of like find the ringing and eliminate it through that. And that's all good. You can leave a static EQ on a track. You can even leave a dynamic EQ so that specific frequency will get dynamically subtracted whenever the threshold hits. So that's all good, but what happens when the frequency shifts, or what happens when that frequency is not a problem, or that resonance is not a problem any longer? Then you're still, especially if you're using a static EQ, you're still changing the sound, and you might not want to change the sound permanently or statically, so to say. And another idea, so this goes back, I'll jump in at the same time to the foundation of Oeksound here. Olli Keskinen we were both studying at the Sibelius Academy, and he's still with the company. He's just focusing on DSP, and he had heard that, for example, in vocal recordings, certain really, really top tier engineers, I think one of them was, for example, Greg Wells, would go through a vocal syllable by syllable and statically remove problematic resonances depending on the syllable, because a singer like Katy Perry might have certain resonances when she's singing an E vowel, or another kind of problematic resonances when she's singing an A vowel, depending on the day, depending on the voice, depending on the microphone, depending on the preamp. I at least think that it also can depend on the preamp. And there's so many factors involved when recording. So Olli asked, why can't the plugin do that for you? This was back in 2016. And so, processing power was already available in computers, not to the same amount as nowadays. Now it's crazy. But yeah, so he made the first version of Soothe, and that specifically automatically analyzes the incoming signals and identifies resonances, and then also suppresses them dynamically as they come in, meaning that it makes that job more automatic. But the whole point then of the interface is to give control to the engineer to decide when and where that should happen. So in essence, that's what Soothe does. It automatically suppresses problematic resonances.
Hey, quick pause. Have you ever felt like your mixes are close, but just not quite to the level that you hear from the pros? The truth is, even with today's powerful home studios, it's the techniques that make all the difference. The Mixing Engineer's Handbook, now in its 6th edition, walks you through these techniques step by step, from EQ and compression to immersive audio and the latest plugins. You'll also hear directly from some of the world's top mixers through exclusive interviews and bonus content. If you want your mixes to sound polished and professional no matter what setup you're working on, Scan the QR code on screen or click the link in the show notes. Now, back to the conversation. It's looking at the resonances and how does that differ from a dynamic EQ? But it's analyzing it, so it's finding the resonance, and the resonance changes all the time, and the dynamic EQ doesn't. Yeah, frequency-wise.
Exactly. So because it's using FFTs, so fast Fourier transforms, pretty much meaning that every kind of sample or very, very short time frame of a signal gets split up into its sine wave components, we can say like that. So you can take like any frame, if you take that from the movie, from the cinema side, like any frame of that audio, and you split it up for what's happening in 20 hertz throughout what's happening up to 20,000 hertz. And then when you add those kind of pictures next to each other, you start to see a pattern. And because those patterns are going to show you that there is a resonance appearing here, then we can immediately through with the algorithm say that, okay, approach that, suppress that this much, or with this algorithm, or with this kind of processing that we're using. So in a way, that's the main difference, is that how we approach it. It's not even a specific threshold, because we're identifying the resonances as resonances, not dependent on a threshold. It's because how much of a resonance does it look like, this oscillation?
There's a lot going on, which makes me wonder about the latency. So how do you take care of that?
Yeah, so of course, if you want to get the most out of a process like this that needs to identify a pattern and react to that, then latency will allow you to get a better end result. So now we're talking about Soothe 3, which is the latest version that came out, for example. Then if you want the best possible result while mixing, you want to give it that 1,000 samples of latency. So enough for it to actually look forward into the future and react before something becomes a problem. Now, there's still the possibility to start using it without latency, with low latency, as Soothe 3 has, but then it identifies the pattern and hits in a bit, let's say, too late in that sense, but it still does a great job, and it still solves a lot of problems. It's just that it doesn't solve them maybe just before it becomes a problem. So very rarely do you actually start noticing, but there are some cases, for example, if you have a singer with a strong vibrato, and let's say that problematic resonance is in that vibrato. Now, when that thing starts moving with latency, we can follow that along, and we can target that. We can follow that along, but with low latency, Soothe doesn't know what's about to happen, so it's going to be a bit later to solve that.
Tell me about the evolution from the original Soothe plugin to Soothe 3.
That's a 10-year journey. So 2016 was the first version of Soothe. It was very much designed for high-mid frequencies. Now we're thinking along with where the human ear is the most critical. Yeah, the most sensitive as well. Yeah, so that's where evolution has taught us that's where we need to be aware of things. So that's the 1K area up to like the 8K area in between there. So the first version of Soothe was very much focused on that area, on both harshness, so harsh resonances, and sibilance, which is also kind of harshness in its in a certain way. But it didn't go lower than 250 hertz, I'd say, or maybe the graphical interface stopped at like 150 or something like that. So that you couldn't approach low mid buildup, for example, with that, or muddy frequencies. Now that already hit off pretty well on Gearspace back then, which had another name back then. But a lot of the great engineers picked it up, Chris Shaw, Greg Wells, as we spoke about, and we got so good feedback from them. We're very happy with how it turned out. And then from there, we obviously knew that some people are already using it to kind of fix muddiness in the recordings, kind of like targeting it in lower frequencies. And as, let's say, a cinematic composition starts to build up as the double basses come in, then they want something to kind of dynamically work against that so it doesn't take over the whole mix. So we knew that we needed to expand it down to the 20 hertz area. Now, pretty much what that meant for us is that we started to implement more algorithms. So there are simultaneous algorithms working at the same time. So there was one for the higher frequencies, and then as you went lower, you got a crossover where the other algorithm started working. So depending on the needs. Now, because it's also extremely important that you follow the right frequency when you're down in the base frequencies, because if that jumps around, the levels jump around a lot more compared to if an S is like 500 hertz in the wrong direction. So yeah, that's one of the things that we focused on from Soothe 1 to Soothe 2. Last minute, I'd say it's like a few weeks before we launched Soothe 2, somebody asked like, why don't we have a sidechain feature in it? Or like, why? Because Soothe 1 didn't have a sidechain feature. And so we were like, I couldn't really wrap my head around all the different ways you could use sidechain for Soothe 2. I knew there were some, like, oh, that's pretty funny. You could probably do the bass kick drum thing with it and stuff like that. But we had no idea, absolutely no idea, that it was going to be so popular to use it as like to carve out space for the vocal in the music bus, or actually become one of the main plugins that you carve out bass with a kick drum, and so many of these, and actually also panning ideas where you have the left channel carving something out of the right channel of a double-tracked guitar, and those jumping around. Many different ways of using the sidechain features. But that was something we added in, like, I think like 2-3 weeks before release. And we're like, well, we'll see what happens. And it turned out to be a really great idea that people really loved. We also, because the soft mode in Soothe 2 was kind of like the more smarter or the softer mode, because we noticed already with Soothe 1 that you could hear some artifacts from it, which the artifacts aren't like part of the, let's say, the FFT algorithms. It's actually like the artifacts are exactly the same as if you would do the same thing with an EQ. You would start doing a lot of those notches that are really that are subtracting like 12 decibels. So if you actually do write in 12 to 30 of those in your audio, it's going to start sounding weird for obvious reasons. So that was something we tried already in Soothe 2 to approach. Of course, we always were meaning to this would become the tool for mixing engineers and mastering engineers. Now, when Soothe 2 came out, and right after that, COVID hit. So it became pretty popular pretty fast because of how many people needed to record in, let's say, suboptimal conditions. So that's when it really became the plugin that everybody was talking about in quite a short amount of time. So we didn't know what was going to happen. And that was a roller coaster for the company over here, and we're so happy about it. And of course, it was a bit like shocking to have so many people just suddenly know about it. But we were happy about it. But also having that, let's say, not the engineer, the mixing engineer and the mastering engineer side. So more the producers, maybe some hobbyists, amateurs, the people that do it like for the love of it, for the love of the game, and so many of such a huge community of new people coming in. They might not understand like the default, that the factory default was meant for like -12, -16, -12 as gain staging. So when they drag and drop their loops in their DAWs and they're hitting -1, then Soothe is doing maybe a bit too much on that material. And that was something we started hearing in music. And this was like Spotify, the 50 top songs on Spotify and Apple Music and titles. And we started hearing it on vocals and on tracks. And we're just like, oh no, we've created this monster. and so we're really, of course, happy that people were using it, but maybe not as happy that people like blindly leaning on it when you're supposed to, the engineer is in control. The engineer is supposed to kind of, if you see it grabbing 9 decibels from your vocal, maybe be aware of what that means, and do the same thing with an EQ and see if you like it. Like, So, but they trusted us. They trusted in the algorithm, and I think it was usually a very good setting. So, but the depth should have just been turned a bit like just lighter on the depth at some point. Now, that's one of the main evolutions going into Soothe 3. Now, Soothe 3, we wanted to fix that. So the soft mode in Soothe 3 is extremely nice on the audio, and it's very difficult to overdo it on it. So because it's very dynamically independent. So gain staging doesn't really matter as much in the soft mode for Soothe 3. It's going to adjust itself according to the incoming signal and make sure that it doesn't go too far. Now, because there was a lot of people that were using Soothe 2 as like a distortion or crazy effect, we wanted to keep that in there. So we left the hard mode there for people to do crazy stuff with it, to like sound shaping, and or even the classic sidechain tricks are really good to use with the hard mode because that's dynamically dependent. So it works more like a compressor or like a multiband compressor. So that was one of the main things. Of course, the sound, like getting rid of so much of that, of those like artifacts as possible, making it cleaner, better on the ear, all in all. And then low latency, of course, everybody was asking for it. And being able to track through that, I've tried it as well. It's very nice working with a vocalist that doesn't get afraid of their own resonances anymore. So they can actually belt stuff. They can actually scream loud. They can actually let the performance come out, even with monitoring themselves while they're doing it, because it's not as aggressive in their ears anymore. Because usually it's like they don't like their voice because of how it sounds through the headphones as they're singing. It's just like, yeah, you're also giving like an information overload while you're doing it. It's so much happening. So sometimes, of course, it's just better to take off the headphones and just do the belting or the shouting without it, with just natural monitoring. But if you want to hear the track at the same time, then something like Soothe while having those on is could be good as well. And multi-channel support, so it goes up to 916. 0.6. Yeah, so the latest one, I think. So we have one of those setups here. We actually got one of those Atmos setups just to be able to kind of like check that everything works well. So yeah, I think that was the main things that we noticed. But for us, from Soothe 2 to Soothe 3, it was very much about fixing this thing of overuse, of people trusting it a bit too much blindly. And now it's a bit more forgiving for engineers and producers that might trust it somewhat blindly, let's say, or think that it knows better than them. So, but in my opinion, still engineers rule. They're the ones in control. They're the ones who should do the decisions. We're not here to take the decisions away from the creatives, because the creatives are the ones in power, and we're trying to, of course, empower them to make better decisions.
I want to go back a bit. You mentioned about there's two algorithms, right? There's one for the low frequencies and one for the higher frequencies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I can actually add there that, so since Soothe 2 going forward, I guess there has been after that like 3 or 4 iterations of the algorithms after that. So Soothe 3 is maybe on iteration number 7 or something of the algorithm. And Soothe 3, because we made Bloom in between, we learned a lot from that as well and incorporated some of that taste in there. So yeah.
You mentioned about the crossover between the low and the higher algorithm. And I'm wondering if there's a problem in the crossover area, like we have in, just traditional crossovers, for instance, or just anything that crosses from one application to another.
Yeah. So on the processing side of Soothe, there are no crossovers. So if any kind of like crossovers happening, or any kind of like band thinking is on the analysis side, but when we are actually creating the suppressions, there are no crossovers. That's the beauty of it, is that we're not approaching, on the processing side, we're not approaching it through crossovers. So that's the way we kind of solve this, is just like having all that happen on the analysis side, identifying the point where we need to create a notch, and then creating that separately.
What application do you find the people use Soothe for mostly, or applications, I should say? There's probably numerous ones.
I guess from the beginning, with all of our plugins, we try and find something within the space of vocals. Vocals being one of the most critical things for the listener. We notice immediately if a vocal is wrong, right? Because evolution has taught us how a vocal sounds and how a nice vocal sounds. So in a sense, we always try, it has to solve something in a vocal. So for Soothe, it's always been the harshness. The harshness in vocals that usually stems from somewhere along the way in the recording chain. Might be the room, the microphone, as I mentioned, the tone, the type of singing, many different things that could affect it. So it's usually something somewhere around there, and that's where we see it usually being used. So vocals is usually where it kind of like shines. But then as soon as you go into this harshness area, you're going to find cymbals and any kind of ringing material. So screeching guitars, anything that really pinches the eardrum is where you really can find good use for it. But then I've seen it used as like a modulation effect, as a distortion, as vocoder. I've seen it used as a vocoder. We had to include a preset as a vocoder in Soothe 3 just because we knew that it could be used like that. So you, through sidechain, you feed, let's say, a synth or something else, or you actually put Soothe on a synth and you put it into delta on hard mode, high detail, and then you feed a vocal through it. And then, of course, because it's going to start not carving out the resonances of the vocal, but actually start boosting, only letting through the resonances of the vocals, which means the formant, right? All the formants of the vocal, which creates this vocoder effect of it. So there's so much that we've seen happen with it and seen it. So if you have a vocal with a reverb, you can carve out the vocal from the reverb, let's say from only the mid channel of the reverb. So the sides stay thick and full, but as the vocal is there, it doesn't get muddy in the mid channel because it carves out its own space, kind of like a footprint in the middle channel of the reverb. So many different ways of using it. And we've tried to put as many as possible of those different use cases in the presets as well, just to kind of give ideas to anyone who picks it up and tries it out to see like, okay, what can it do? But I'm guessing I still haven't seen all of them, even though it's been out for 10 years, the different versions.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, what the unusual uses were, but I think you've just touched on them. There seems to be many.
Yeah, it's definitely. I mean, mastering engineers also use it, like obviously a lot more subtly than, and kind of just more as a safety, kind of like the resonances can come up here, but no further than that. And that's also a very nice way to think about it, that you can just use it as subtly as just carving out half a dB here and there, and it works very well for that. Or then you can make it into a vocoder. So.
Yeah, right. Let's talk about Bloom for a second, because that's a different approach to EQ. So how did that come about?
Bloom came about, we were asking ourselves kind of what is warmth and what is presence in a sound, and then kind of like, what is something we usually want? We've just recorded something, and then what's the first thing we kind of do to mold the sound into what we want? A lot of people want the combination of like warmth and presence in a sound, just to kind of like, okay, let's take away whatever is kind of like hiding the character from that. The recording made the character not come out properly. So now we can use Bloom here. And I actually use Bloom maybe 5 times more than I use Soothe. Like I pick it up way more often, because for me it replaces like 5 plugins at the same time. So for me it's just a fast way to get 80%, let's say 80% of the way with the sound. And because it also has the low pass and high pass filters and just the normal stuff you need. But yeah, warmth, presence, and it turned out that had a lot to do with overtone series and like how they're divided across the signal. And now using the same kind of FFT approach, now following along the incoming signal and then kind of adjusting for any inequalities in the sound that sticks out from this warm and present sound. So now that's like the default setting. When you open it up, it's going to try and do something that's warm and present, right? But then we of course knew that we wanted this to be our color box, like our tone. It's called a tone shaper, an adaptive tone shaper. So it's very much used to kind of like push the sound in the direction you want it as fast as possible. I want this to be bright. All right, you push up that fader and you turn down that fader and you turn up the amount. Okay, you want this to be in your face. Okay, you go up into the squash area, you add some high mids, and it becomes extremely upfront in the sound. But the main thing is that every single one of those changes that it's doing is adaptive, meaning that it's only gonna boost low frequencies if there are low frequencies to boost, or if they actually make sense to the overall tone. So depending on what's happening in 5,000 hertz, it's going to do different things in 50 hertz. And depending on what's happening in 50 hertz, it's going to do something different at 1,000 and 5,000 hertz, because it's always looking at the full signal and then at the settings you've applied. And then it applies the processing after that. So a very kind of like new approach that is very, I call it considerate. I like to call it considerate because it feels like Bloom is always considering the incoming signal and not just blindly applying 15 decibels of high shelf across the whole signal as a static curve. No, it's only applying it when there's not enough high frequencies. So in that case, kind of like when there is, so a good example would be a vocal. A vocal, we usually want some more high frequencies, but then that S sound comes in, right? The sibilance. So it's going to duck that sibilance because the sibilant doesn't need more high frequencies, right? So it's like you've put a Pultec, a de-esser, and a Pultec like after each other there, but instead you only have Bloom because it not only applies the high shelf on your high frequency on the vocal, but it also ducks the S when it comes through. So that's kind of like one of the examples I use it for. But for me, very much kind of like, I want this sound to be more in this direction, 80% of the way there, and then I maybe use some Soothe and some Spiff and some other great plugins along the side. But I get a lot faster to kind of this like effect thinking, where I kind of like think about space and I think about delays and that, because I got the normal like cleaning and tone shaping I've already done with Bloom and Soothe.
The philosophy of the company seems way different than many other developers. Your total approach is different, which, is kind of nice. I mean, we have these new tools, and let's use them, and let's come at it from the direction that we need to solve the problem, rather than the traditional way. And nobody needs another 1176 or a Pultec plugin, so congratulations for staying away from that. But I saw somewhere about how you guys tune everything by ear.
Yeah. Yes. So I think along with Soothe 2 and 2020, already back then there was a lot of talk about machine learning and AI, and like, so you just had this algorithm go through so much material that you know what like bad resonances are, and that you know that what good sound is. No, this is two people. This is Tommy and Olli sitting in a studio here, just like listening to the same audio examples and being like, if I change this math on the algorithm here, does it sound better? Listening, I don't think that sounds better. And going back, doing another run, doing that so much, like hours and hours on end of just being like, but in my opinion, it doesn't sound right to me. So it's so funny that like, so their ears have actually, I can say this because I haven't done the tuning of these, is that in my opinion, their ears have shaped a lot of music that's out there, just because they're using this tool that picks out resonances based on what they heard in their audio. And they're, of course, they're all mixing engineers and recording engineers and live engineers and composers and producers and musicians. I mean, they do everything. We all over half of the company are the same. So very much coming from it, like from it, I'm also sitting right now in a studio where this is where I work when I make music. I write songs, I produce, I mix, and just approaching plugin development through that lens of course, it always needs to sound good to us first before we even let anyone else hear it, in a sense. And during the test stage, if somebody like disagrees with what sounds good or not, we're probably going to go with our gut feeling, because if we don't like it when we release it, why are we doing this? Yeah, it's very much that approach. So not very this like database driven thinking of machine learning of just feed it all the information and the computer is going to know best. No, the computer will not know best. Music is subjective. It functions on emotions, right? And so when
love that.
Yeah. So when we feel that it's right, and when we feel that it's wrong, it's not ready yet.
I always felt with the machine learning based plugins that they basically look at 100 different examples and say, okay, this is the average of what sounds good. And then I think, well, wait, but that's not the case, because you still have to put it in the track and it's going to be different every time because the arrangement's the same or is different and everything's so different. So how does this work in the real world? And that's why I like your approach much better, because you're coming from it from a very organic standpoint.
But again, nobody's done these things before. I think somewhere in the analog space, machine learning makes a lot of sense because people want the same thing as they have in their rack. So then they put a million things through that thing in their rack, and they try to do the machine learning point of view. And maybe in that case, that is the best approach for it. But when you're doing something from scratch, when you're doing something that hasn't really, well, of course, has not been done in hardware before, because it's not even possible to do this in hardware, then you have the freedom. It frees you up to think, oh, what's possible and what would sound nice, like what would feel nice. And then you start from there instead, and not like, how close can we get to whatever was good in the 80s?
Well, again, thank you for that, because that's such a refreshing approach. I'm so tired of people trying to replicate what was once the standard and isn't any longer. Let's talk about Spiff for a second. So how did that come about? And I know it takes your unique approach. It's the same thing. You have a very unique approach as a company to doing this. And so how did that come about?
So this was back in 2018. We had released, or only had released, the first version of Soothe. And immediately when he had released it, or pretty fast after that, Tommy Grön, which is the other kind of DSP genius in the house, he joined forces with Olli. Incredible that they both happened to be here in Helsinki, Finland. And he had this idea of using kind of this technology that was behind Soothe to approach mouth clicks in vocals. And because he was focusing on transients with that. But not a transient like we already have transient designer, we already have transient shapers. That works really well for boosting drums, putting stuff more up front. But for him it was more like, well, what about that very detailed and very fine ASMR? Well, through ASMR, we really understood what that was, right? So like with all of that content that's up there in the high frequencies. So the first use case for Spiff that it was made for was this really the classic pop sound, like the Billie Eilish sound, where she's eating the microphone, and it's a very like high frequency. It's a 251 or it's a C800, or like it's a bright microphone, right? And then you put again the Pultec compressor Pultec on it, so there's a lot of high frequency, of course, and then you start to hear every single small sound that the voice does in between all the stuff you really want to hear. So all the clicks and pops. Now those are transients, but they're not the loudest transients, because if you get a p or a t or a d in the vocal, that's probably going to be louder. But because they're frequency specific to the higher frequencies, we'll need something like the algorithm behind Soothe, the FFT approach of like splitting up the whole signal into its frequency components. And that way, when that click or pop comes, you just put a high shelf of like minus 15 decibels, but it's so fast that you don't really hear it in any other way, that it just takes away that click. And it doesn't take it away, it suppresses it. This is where I want to be very clear, because there are declick plugins, there are declick and depop plugins, and some of them just removes the click, and sometimes it feels like it leaves a hole there where there used to be the content, right? But this is more like the same approach that like somebody like Greg Wells had with vocals, of you remove the harshness from one syllable. Now you do that for the click. So you go in with Audio Soothe in Pro Tools and you paint over the click, and you put a 15 decibel high shelf and hopefully dynamic EQ over that area that just punches out the click when that appears. And then you go to the next click and you do that again, and you go to the next click and you do that again. So, but the approach with Spiff was of course, well, now it does it automatically for you. So you just put it on and you decide how much you want to suppress those sounds. Now, usually you don't even want to completely remove them because they're part of the performance. It's just that they become a bit too much in the way when you start to boost high frequencies and put compressors on. So in a way, it's just to push them back. As soon as we have done that, somebody at the office just asked or told me, was probably thinking, well, why can't we boost transients with the same algorithm? And then he put the boost mode in there. And then he understood that, oh, this is actually a pretty good like general purpose transient shaper. So then it became our adaptive transient shaper. But we started from the mouth clicks, and then we opened it up to all other transient ways. And I use it in so many ways. I even use it for panning, because if you use it in stereo mode and you pan, so you boost transients only on the left channels, or like 30% to the left channel. If you have a double, let's say you have a stereo mic'd piano that's playing, and you like how it sounds, its levels are very nice. It's like it's evenly spread out throughout this stereo field. No channel is louder, but you still want it to come from the right side. Now, if you start to pan the whole thing, then you're going to miss out all that nice energy in the left channel. But one thing you can do is you can focus Spiff a bit to the right, and you can boost the transients on the right channel, and suddenly that piano is going to sound like it's coming from the right side, but the level is still evenly spread across because it's only the transients appearing there. So yeah, you're getting a bit of peaks from there, but the RMS is going to stay stable.
What a great trick. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like this more evolved kind of panning that I like to do, especially on more acoustic tracks.
I definitely have to try that. That's great.
Yeah,
very cool.
It's very nice.
All right. Hannes, thank you very much. This has been great. I enjoyed the conversation. I learned a lot from you. One last question for you. So this has been a 10-year journey. And like you say, you've learned a lot too. There's been a lot going on, especially when all of a sudden the company blew up. So have you received any information from somebody, any tips or tricks, or have you learned something along the way maybe that was really important to you, or did somebody impart something to you?
Very many things. But I think when it comes to, if we want to stay a bit on topic, I'd say I've been thinking a lot about people trusting these kind of tools like blindly, and especially because we're getting more and more tools that automate processes. And I think it's nice as long as you understand what your job is, like, and you have that down for yourself. And especially for me, I started as like an engineer, mixing engineer, and went into production, and then went into songwriting. And I fell in love with songwriting after I had studied how to mic a orchestra or a jazz ensemble or a folk ensemble, full on recording, mixing engineer nerd. And then suddenly I fell in love with thinking about the third line of the second verse and stuff like that. Just because I asked myself what matters. And for me, in the end, it's just like, for me, what matters is that I feel something. And then and of course, all of what happens along the way kind of just summarizes into how can we make somebody feel something more? I think that's what these tools are meant to allow you to get to, either faster, easier, without having to spend too much time. I think that's one thing I've learned, is that in the end, we're here to just make people feel things.
Thanks for listening and being in my inner circle. Remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to questions@bobbyowsinski.com. You can also learn all about the latest in music, audio, and production news, and find out about openings for my latest online classes at bobbyowsinski.com. This is Bobby Owsinski. I will see you next time.